Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here and for giving a few minutes of your time to this channel. If you enjoy deep, meaningful stories that stay with you long after they end, take a moment to like this video and follow the channel. Here, every story is told with heart, honesty, and purpose, and every ending is designed to leave an impact. Now take a deep breath, and let's begin today's story. My grandfather's name was Robert Miller. He was born and raised in a small town in Ohio. The kind of place where people wave at each other on the street and hard work is considered a virtue above all else. From a very young age, Robert learned two important lessons. The world is unforgiving, and no one is coming to save you if you fail. His family wasn't poor, but they were always one problem away from struggle. A missed paycheck meant stress. An unexpected bill meant sacrifice. So as a teenager, Robert made a promise to himself, a promise that would shape his entire life. I will never depend on anyone. He started working early. First small jobs, then long shifts at a local factory. Robert wasn't the smartest man in the room. He wasn't the most talented either, but he was the most disciplined. He arrived before everyone else, left after everyone else, took extra shifts, never complained. While other young men dreamed of travel, freedom, and experiences, Robert dreamed of stability. To him, money didn't mean pleasure. It meant safety. He believed deeply in the American dream. Work hard. Save your money. Build something solid. Enjoy life later. And later became the word that defined him. Robert got married young. Had children. Bought a modest but comfortable home. From the outside, everything looked right. Everything looked responsible. But inside that perfect routine, something slowly disappeared. My grandfather never took vacations. When he did take time off, he felt uneasy. Rest made him uncomfortable. Spending money made him anxious. Travel felt wasteful. Leisure felt irresponsible. Joy felt unnecessary. He used to say, "When everything is secure, then I'll enjoy life." Growing up, I thought this was normal. I believed adulthood meant being tired. That maturity meant sacrificing happiness. That joy was something reserved for the end of life. I never heard my grandfather say, "That was the best day of my life." Instead, I heard things like, "That was a hard year. I worked nonstop. I saved every penny." Those were his proudest stories. Years passed quietly. The savings grew. The bills stayed paid. The retirement plan looked solid. But life itself became smaller. Few memories. Few photos. Few moments that stood out. He said no to invitations. No to family trips. No to pauses. Always with the same answer. Later. Later when work slows down. Later when there's more money. Later when things are calmer. Then one day, his body started to resist. Climbing stairs became difficult. Fatigue became constant. Pain became familiar. He ignored it, because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant facing a terrifying question. What if I waited too long? And then came the diagnosis. Cold. Simple. Final. A disease that didn't give dates, but took certainty away. For the first time in his life, time stopped being abstract. Now it mattered. In that moment, all the money he had saved couldn't buy health, couldn't buy time, couldn't buy peace. And sitting there in silence, my grandfather began to understand something no one had ever taught him. But that understanding came late. After the diagnosis, nothing felt the same anymore. My grandfather was still the same man, but the world around him had changed. Or maybe the world had always been that way, and only now he was finally seeing it clearly. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what to do. All his life, Robert believed planning could fix everything. If something went wrong, he saved more. If a problem appeared, he worked harder. If fear showed up, he locked away more money. That was his formula, and for a long time it worked. But now, he was facing a kind of problem that didn't respond to discipline or effort. The illness didn't negotiate. It didn't care how many years he worked, how many weekends he gave up, how many sacrifices he made. It just kept moving forward. Slowly, quietly, relentlessly. In the first few months, my grandfather lived in denial. He said it was just exhaustion, that he would bounce back soon, that it was only a rough phase. He had survived rough phases before. But this time, his body no longer obeyed his will. Little things started disappearing. Long walks, hands-on projects, the energy he was known for. Each loss seemed small on its own, but together, they were devastating. And with every new limitation, a question quietly formed in his mind. If not now, then when? That's when something changed inside him. For the first time, he stopped talking about money and started talking about time. He stared at the clock like it was a stranger, watched the day pass in silence, thought about things he had never allowed himself to think about before. One afternoon, he asked me to sit beside him. His voice was weaker, but his eyes sharper than ever. He said something simple, yet crushing. It's strange. I spent my whole life afraid of running out of money, and I was never afraid of running out of time. He paused. Now I see which fear was the wrong one. For the first time, he started remembering the life he didn't live. Not with anger, but with quiet awareness. Trips he never took. Moments he always postponed. Conversations he said he'd have someday. He realized something painful. It wasn't the lack of money that stopped him from living. It was the habit of waiting. He had the means. He had opportunities. But he never gave himself permission. My grandfather began saying things I had never heard from him before. I always thought life would start after everything felt safe. But life was happening while I was waiting. There was no bitterness in his voice. Only a calm sadness. The kind that appears when there's no rewind button left. The hardest part for him wasn't the illness. It was clarity. The clarity of realizing he spent years preparing for a future that never arrived the way he imagined. Then he said something that stayed with me forever. Money gave me security, but it stole my stories. In that moment, I finally understood that phrase. Never save money. It wasn't advice. It was a warning that came too late. Because saving money was never the real problem. Saving life for later was. In the days that followed, he tried to live differently. Sitting in the sun, listening to old songs, sharing stories from his youth. But there was a quiet pain behind it all. He was trying to live, when time was already running short. No one prepares you for this truth. Regret doesn't scream. It whispers. And it always whispers too late. My grandfather finally understood that the greatest risk in life isn't spending too much. It's waiting too long. Because everything you keep postponing, one day becomes impossible. And it was right there, when the truth was already clear, that he said the most powerful sentence of all. A sentence that completely changed how I see money, time, and choices. But that sentence deserves silence before it's heard. And that silence leads us to the next part. The room was quiet that day. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The heavy kind. The kind that makes you aware of every breath. Every second passing. My grandfather asked me to close the door and sit closer. He didn't want to raise his voice anymore. Not because he couldn't, but because he wanted every word to land. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. Then he said, "There's something I need to tell you. Not because I'm wise, but because I waited too long to be." He took a slow breath. I believed money would protect me from regret. That sentence alone hit harder than anything before it. He told me how, in his 20s, he wanted to travel across the country. In his 30s, he wanted to start a small business. In his 40s, he wanted to take long road trips with my grandmother. But every time, the same thought stopped him. Not yet. Not yet became his favorite phrase. Not yet, because the savings weren't enough. Not yet, because the economy was uncertain. Not yet, because there would be time later. He said that word so often. That later quietly disappeared. Then he looked straight at me and asked, "Do you know what's dangerous about not yet?" I shook my head. He answered, "It sounds responsible, but it slowly steals your life." He explained something that shocked me. He wasn't unhappy. He was comfortable. And comfort, he said, is far more dangerous than pain. Pain forces change. Comfort encourages delay. My life was safe, he said. But it was small. That sentence hung in the air. He told me how he measured success by what he didn't lose. Didn't lose money. Didn't lose stability. Didn't lose control. But he never measured success by what he experienced. Then came the moment I'll never forget. He reached for my hand. His grip was weak, but intentional. And he said, "I don't regret working hard. I regret waiting to live." He told me something that no financial book ever teaches. Money is replaceable. Time is not. And the biggest lie people believe is that they'll know when it's time to live. You never get a warning, he said. Life doesn't tap you on the shoulder. He paused, gathering strength. Then he said the sentence that would forever echo in my mind. Don't save money at the cost of your life. He explained what he really meant. Save enough to be safe, he said. But never so much that you postpone joy. Because joy doesn't wait. Moments don't wait. People don't wait. He told me he thought he was being responsible. But responsibility without courage becomes fear in disguise. And fear, dressed as logic, looks very convincing. Tears quietly ran down his face. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just honest. I thought I was winning, he whispered. But I was just surviving really well. Then he said something even heavier. One day you'll realize you're old. And you won't remember most of your days. Not because nothing happened, but because you lived them all the same. That was his greatest fear. Not dying, but realizing too late that he never truly lived. He squeezed my hand one last time and said, "Promise me something." I nodded, barely holding my voice together. "Promise me you won't wait for permission to live." That conversation didn't feel like advice. It felt like a transfer. Like he was handing me everything he learned too late. A few weeks later, his health declined faster. But something in him had already changed. He wasn't afraid anymore. And that scared me more than the illness. Because when someone stops being afraid of losing time, it usually means they know how little is left. And that realization leads directly to the final lesson. The one he shared in his last days. The one that ties everything together. The lesson that gives this story its true meaning. The last days didn't arrive suddenly. They came slowly, almost politely, as if time itself didn't want to scare us. My grandfather grew quieter. Not weaker in spirit, just more selective with his words. He spoke less, but when he did, everyone listened. The house felt different. Not sad, not heavy, just aware. Aware that something important was coming to an end. He spent more time near the window, watching the street, watching people walk by with places to go, dreams to chase, lives still rushing forward. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes his eyes filled with tears. One afternoon, I found him holding an old photo album. Pictures from decades ago. Him and my grandmother when they were young. Friends who were gone. Moments frozen in time. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful. "I remember thinking these moments would last forever," he said softly. "And somehow, I thought I could relive them later." He closed the album. But life doesn't replay scenes. In those final days, something surprising happened. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry at the world. He was peaceful. And that peace didn't come from acceptance of death. It came from truth. He had stopped lying to himself. That was the real release. One night, the house was silent. No TV. No radio. Just the sound of breathing and time moving forward. He asked me to sit beside him again. "I want you to understand something," he said. "I didn't waste my life." That surprised me. I just misunderstood it. He explained that he thought life was something you earned. After enough work. After enough sacrifice. After enough security. But life, he realized, is something you participate in. Every day. Or you miss it. Then he said something I wasn't ready to hear. I was always preparing for the future, instead of living in the present. And the present, he whispered, is the only place life ever happens. He looked tired, but calm. And then came the goodbye, not spoken directly but felt. He squeezed my hand gently. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I'm just sad I didn't trust myself sooner." That night, as I watched him sleep, I realized something terrifying. He had done everything society praised him for. Worked hard. Saved money. Avoided risks. Played it safe. And yet, he still felt he missed something essential. A few days later, he passed away quietly. No dramatic moment. No final speech. Just silence. After the funeral, life continued. Cars drove by. People laughed. Bills arrived. The world didn't pause. It never does. But I carried his words with me. They were heavier than grief. They were responsibility. Weeks later, as I sorted through his things, I found an envelope. Inside was a short note. Just one sentence. "Don't wait to live." That was it. No explanation. No advice. Just truth. And suddenly everything made sense. The phrase, the warning, the regret. Never save money. Not literally, but spiritually. Because saving money is easy. Saving your life for later is what costs everything. And that realization leads us to the final part. The part where the lesson becomes yours. The part where the story stops being about my grandfather and starts being about you. That night, silence filled the room in a way it never had before. Not the heavy silence of loneliness, but the calm silence of understanding. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't running from her thoughts. She wasn't afraid of them anymore. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, and suddenly it all became clear. It was never about the money. Not really. It was about the years she spent believing she wasn't enough. The years she stayed quiet when she wanted to speak. The dreams she postponed because someone once told her to be realistic. The choices she made out of fear instead of love. She realized how often she had given pieces of herself away. To expectations. To opinions. To people who never truly saw her. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She placed her hand over her chest and felt her heart beating, steady and alive. She was still here. Still breathing. Still capable of starting over. A single tear rolled down her face, but this time it wasn't filled with pain. It was filled with relief. Because she finally understood that letting go doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it means surviving. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I forgive you. Forgive yourself for not knowing better. Forgive yourself for staying too long. Forgive yourself for doubting your own worth." That was the moment she stopped fighting who she was and started embracing who she was becoming. The night passed quietly, without drama, without chaos. Just peace. A peace she had never allowed herself to feel before. When morning came, the sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, touching her face like a soft reminder. "You're still here. And this is a new beginning." She stood up slowly, looked at her reflection in the mirror, and noticed something different. Her face hadn't changed, but her eyes had. They were clearer, stronger, more awake. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she no longer needed it to be. She made her coffee, feeling the warmth of the cup in her hands, grounding herself in the present moment. For once, her mind wasn't trapped in the past or anxious about the future. She was simply there. And that was enough. As the days passed, small changes began to appear. She started saying no without guilt. She stopped explaining herself to people who never listened. She chose rest over exhaustion, truth over comfort, peace over approval. She understood that being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. It means knowing when to let go. Some people drifted away, and that was okay. They were only meant to walk with her for a chapter, not the whole story. Others stayed, surprised by her new boundaries, but slowly learning to respect them. And then there was her, showing up for herself every single day. She began to dream again. Not the loud, impossible dreams people laugh at, but quiet, honest dreams that felt like home. She dreamed of waking up without fear, of loving without shrinking, of living without asking permission. And step by step, she moved toward that life. She realized something powerful. She was never poor in money. She was rich in fears that were never hers to carry. Fears passed down. Fears taught. Fears absorbed from a world that profits from insecurity. Once she saw that clearly, she chose differently. She chose courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. She chose herself. And if you're listening to this story right now, there's a reason. Because maybe in some quiet corner of your heart, you recognized yourself in her. Maybe you've also been holding on for too long. Maybe you've been waiting for the right moment to change. Maybe you've been living a life that looks fine on the outside, but feels heavy on the inside. Let this be your reminder. It's not too late. You're not behind. And you're not broken. You're becoming. Life doesn't begin when everything is perfect. It begins when you decide you deserve peace. So take a deep breath. Release what no longer belongs to you. And trust that the next chapter doesn't need to look like the last one. Because sometimes the most beautiful endings are actually beginnings in disguise. If this story touched your heart, like it, follow, and share. There are still many beautiful stories waiting to be told. And the next one might be yours.